So as the relatively new Vice-Chancellor of the University of London, it's a great pleasure to welcome everyone here for today's meeting. Like me, many of you here are responsible for helping lead your institutions and organizations through what looks like a period of significant disruptive change in the higher education sector. And so, again, like me, you're all wondering, what on earth does this mean for us individually and collectively? What should we be thinking about? What should we be doing? And MOOCs in particular have dominated the sector press for several months, and the debate shows no sign of abating. And many of you will have seen perhaps the opinion piece in the Sunday New York Times last month when Thomas Friedman, he of the world is flat persuasion, claimed that this represents a revolution about to fundamentally disrupt universities as we currently perceive them. Well, how to respond to this challenge, and is it a real challenge? Although distance learning, in inverted commas, has a long pedigree, and the University of London is a case in point, since 1858 in fact, online education has only 2 decades of history, and MOOCs only really appeared last year. So this is all very recent, but despite the recent appearance, we witnessed an incredible amount of hype around MOOCs, the concept of MOOCs. And late last year, perhaps it was possible for university leaders to choose to ignore all this, but do so at your peril. Again, many of you will have seen the much publicized case at the University of Virginia. The unfortunate president, Teresa Sullivan, although by all normal standards popular and effective in the university, was temporarily at least edged out of her role by the University Board of Visitors on the basis that she was not perceived to be cutting edge and wasn't engaging with MOOCs quickly enough. That resulted in a storm of protest, and many of you know that she was reinstated. And it was bizarre because Virginia had in any case been in discussions with Coursera and are an active partner. So beware, the question is no longer really whether university leaders and leaders of organizations connected with higher education should consider MOOCs, but how quickly and on what basis they need to get engaged. Many commentators have drawn parallels with the type of disruptive innovation that has ripped through the music industry and currently doing the same perhaps for publishing and other media. Witness the HMV crisis last month. Is the same happening or about to happen to higher education, as Friedman would have it? Much of the controversy of Virginia surrounded the board understanding of the academic context and indeed the lack in this case of effectively faculty engagement with the board. Members of the business community who act as university governors will be very familiar with these disruptions to the kind of industries I've mentioned. But it's not obvious how those kind of understandings will play out and how those disruptions will play out in the university context. So our responsibility here, and part of what today is about, is to foster constructive debate with stakeholders, all stakeholders, so that we can build some kind of joint understanding of the issues and the actions that are needed to come out of this disruptive, potentially disruptive situation. So I hope today will help focus our minds in this respect. Those who run universities need obviously always to observe and analyze, to identify the very real societal and technological changes that are driving the emerging innovation. And one of those factors obviously relates to costs and accountabilities of higher education in a world experiencing severe economic challenge. So last month, again, many of you may have noticed that Moody's downgraded its credit outlook for the entire US higher education sector, citing increasing financial pressures on households, on endowments, and on non-tuition revenue sources. Their report also drew attention to the increasing burden of student loans, the worsening default situation, and the consequent questioning of the value of a degree. So price sensitivity, in some broad sense, is more of an issue now than ever, and depressed enrollments are widely reported in the United States in all but the most elite institutions. The Moody report also said that universities are now starting to move from mere trimming of costs to more fundamental root and branch re-examinations of the cost structures of the traditional business models. So it's not a surprise that new exciting potential models of delivery involving real scale of reach and associated economies in return on investment look promising to the sector. And not surprising that many students might well welcome the prospect of higher education with lower price barriers to entry. The early 90s, going back to technology, also marked a watershed in the way that knowledge is accessed with the arrival of the first generally used search engines. So until then, perhaps not exactly, but knowledge was only available in special places, like libraries, and through special people, like teachers. Many of today's students are more likely to seek first help from Wikipedia than from tutors. At the same time, we have the effect of a generation brought up with social networking technology. That's starting to make itself felt in the way that people engage within universities in peer group interaction and social connectivity. So all put together, the challenges to the traditional classroom model of transmission are obvious. And so we'd be foolish with these changes going on to not reflect on how our pedagogic models that worked pre-90s may have to change. So we're going to have to take all this in our stride and continue to engage and challenge audiences in universities through adapted pedagogical approaches, such as the flipped classroom, where MOOC material is co-opted and curated in the classroom context, a kind of hybrid model of learning. So as leaders, again, how do we react to these changes and ensure that our institutions fully debate the context and the modern reality? Another critical question I'd like to throw out is the question of reputation and prestige. The University of London has a commitment to access to high-quality higher education that dates back to 1858, when students studying outside the colleges of the university were first allowed to enter the University of London examination. This has evolved in our case to our present international programs, which currently have 52,000 students registered in over 180 countries, studying for a University London degree of a very modest cost. So this is not the typical model. And throughout much of the UK and the United States, leading universities have only been accessible to a relatively limited number of students who can make it to the campus, who can pay full fees or get the support system. Suddenly, it looks as though it's possible for anyone with an internet connection anywhere in the world to sign on for courses at no or little cost, and they have signed up in their millions. So the question that more elite institutions will have to ask themselves is, what will that do for reputation if one gets engaged in this process? Moving from an exclusive position of good to a freely accessible good at little or no cost, albeit at the moment with no or little credit attached, although that too is evolving. This is a very significant change of context. So institutions that sign up for one of the MOOC platforms, or indeed create their own, must ask themselves the question, what will this do for my reputation and strategic positioning in the world? I suspect that most of the debate today, or a lot of the debate today, will, at the end of the day, be actually about emerging business models for integrating MOOC developments into viable business models for conventional universities. And Bill Norton, who will speak after me, will cover this in more detail, an absolutely crucial issue. And of course, delivery of MOOCs is not cost-free. It demands considerable investment in the creation and maintenance of high-quality materials, even though after creation, costs can be amortized through massive volume use. I think, speaking personally, and perhaps more generally, I'm not sure many of us understand and know how this tide of evolution, of this innovation will evolve. There will, I think it's obvious, be many efforts made to monetize MOOCs and different trends and thoughts evident already in this respect, payment for certificates to connectivity with potential employers. And one crucial element of this discussion is that question of awarding credits for MOOCs. If you stand back a bit, alongside that, we need to take apart, I think, more carefully the traditional value chain of education and reconstruct it in a way that makes clear what the value offerings to students are for each part of the chain. The MOOC study itself, the interaction and engagement with the university, the path to credits, or path, indeed, at the end of the day, new routes to employment and professional advancement, where that's relevant. Where's the added value in each part of the chain? And the other issue, I suppose, we ought to consider, who are the audience for MOOCs? Early MOOCs grew up in the United States. Primary audience was an American one, but now there's great interest across the globe. Coursera primarily reached out initially to the English-speaking world, but now there's developments in the Francophone, Hispanic, Portuguese, and Chinese language communities. Again, in some parts of the world, historically, there has been a traditional distrust of distance education. Maybe, again, the advent of MOOCs will help to break down those kind of perceptions and attitudes. Currently, the predominant audience for MOOCs seems to be an audience that already has a degree. I think some 80% of those signed up for Coursera already have the first or second degree. And the primary interest is in continuing education. Now, whether that form of entry into education is likely to appeal to significant parts of a traditional school leaver cohort remains, I think, an open question, but a rather crucial one as we go forward. Then a final issue perhaps to mention, the issue of coverage. Clearly the artificial intelligence and computing routes of some of the initial MOOCs has led to a preponderance of courses in those disciplines, at least initially, but that seems to be rapidly changing. edX coverage, for example, ranges from ancient Greek literature to challenges of global poverty. And we have with us last week in the University of London, Daphne Koller, co-founder of Coursera, who expressed an aspiration really to eventually cover the core content of every major subject. So are we likely to see an increase in introductory and entry-level courses rather than the rather specialized continuing education courses that are available now? Will those courses be pulled together by credit-recognizing institutions to form coherent programs in the way that the Council for American Education is considered? And what questions and challenges does that pose for us in the UK as institutions? So universities are often sort of portrayed as rather conservative institutions where change is incremental, takes place slowly. Well, maybe. But universities are very much generators of new ideas, innovative thinking and critical analysis, and have consciously resisted over the years attempts to make them focus on near measurable, rather utilitarian outcomes. And universities are also places, of course, where freedom to think, talk, experiment is encouraged, even in parts of the world where this is actively discouraged. So I think we must obviously welcome and respond to Thomas Friedman's revolution challenge. It provides us with a stimulus to question, critically appraise, and refresh our approach to that which I guess motivated most of us to get into this world, the art and science of higher education. So I very much hope that this meeting will contribute to that process of critical appraisal. Speaking for myself, I don't have the faintest idea where all this is going to go.